however you like to refer to it today. Senator Carter? Yes, sir. Let's start with Resolution 765, if that's okay with you.
That's more fine with me. That's current, so I remember something about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For you today, Senate Resolution 765, a very simple bill. This deals with two pieces of property that we are asking for an easement on. Both of them are, one of them's in a state park, the other is in a state-owned heritage preserve. The one that goes over, and help me with the pronunciation, this is Tolaliga? What? Tolaliga River on State Route 36 in Butts County. What DOT is requesting this because they are rebuilding a bridge over this, and they simply need to be able to have the right-of-way next to it so that the bridge, they can build the bridge while the other one's still in. And the other piece of property is in Bryan County in the Richmond Hill Wildlife Management Area. And this is simply for a transmission line to be constructed to go across in that area. The Georgia Transmission Corporation and Coastal EMC collectively would be doing this. And that is all we are asking for in this particular bill, Mr. Chairman.
Members of the committee, anyone have questions for the senator? Representative Hill.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Carter, thank you very much for bringing this before us. If I might, sir, on page 5, I'll give you a moment to get it.
Okay.
Okay, on page 5 under section 3.5, pretty much down on starting line 133, if Georgia Transmission Corporation abandons this at any time, they'll have the option of removing their facilities if the property shall be revert to the state of Georgia. But what if the state of Georgia doesn't want the equipment or whatever they might abandon on there? Is there a place where the state of Georgia can require the transmission corporation to remove this, whatever properties they may abandon? In other words, I see a one-way street where they can leave it there if they want it or not, but if it's something we'd rather have them remove and have this restored to its original condition, is there anywhere in here that would allow the state of Georgia to require them to do so? I may be missing it. This is just an open-ended question here, sir.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for your question, Representative. Mr. Chairman, if I may, could I ask for help from...
You absolutely can. I would imagine that might be from Mr. Smith.
No, well, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Is it either DNR or...
Okay.
It doesn't matter.
You can call up whoever you like.
Okay. Where's it at?
Section 3.7.
In Section 3.7...
Does that supersede 3.5? I saw that in 3.7, but I didn't see that it superseded 3.5, and that's my overall question. That if it's legally...
Mr. Chairman, it is our standard language we put in all easements that if the easement goes away, we have the option of either saying that's our property or requiring that the person who placed their improvement on our property to remove it. So we do have that option.
Okay, that is covered. Thank you very much.
Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a relatively simple little bill. I just want to make sure that the legislators representing that area be notified.
They have. I was a sponsor of the bill, and it is in my district, and also Senator Grant of the 25th is
And the House members.
And the House members. We'll
You know,
make sure
the little people that you used to serve with.
I'm not going to respond to that.
And also the High Falls one, you might want to
Yes.
notify Representative Maddox. You know, it was his
Yeah.
birthplace.
Let's make sure they do know about it. It's a good point. Thank you.
Representative Green.
Thank you. Let me make sure I understand the reason that we're doing this and not putting it with our other compensation resolutions and conveyances is that it is designated as part of the Heritage Preserve. We have to take that particular part off, put it back like it was. We're actually legislating that off, and then we're free to put this other part, move it on and as a separate entity.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the committee? Committee is not very talkative today. All right, the committee feels better about it. Any other questions? Representative?
Mr. Chairman, at the proper time, I'd like to move due pass to Senate Resolution 765.
We have a motion and a second due pass Senate Resolution 765. Any other discussion? All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed, no? It is passed.
That's it.
Yes, it was. Mr. Chairman, where would you like to start now?
You know, that's a good question, and perhaps if we could just start with the enabling legislation for state properties, which I believe would have been Senate Bill 37.
Yes, sir.
Okay. If I may?
Absolutely.
It may help to refresh everyone's memory of what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to do is just, first of all, the enabling legislation, we have the State Properties Commission who wants to be able to enter into multi-year leases. The ability to enter into multi-year leases would benefit the state and actually save the state millions of dollars. In fact, it's been estimated that the cost avoidance by doing this would be somewhere around $37 million over a 10-year period, which is significant, as you can imagine. But it also has some more benefits to it. The fact that we would be able to enter into long-term leases would also give us better rates. It would also allow us to make improvements to the property. Right now, if we make improvements when we can only sign a one-year lease, obviously that doesn't behoove the state to go in and make improvements, nor does it behoove the property owner to make improvements on their property, knowing that they only have a lease for 1 year. If they can have a long-term lease, then they are more likely to go in and make improvements to the property. So the benefits of having the state being able to enter into long-term leases are obvious here, and that's simply what we're trying to do. Senate Bill 37, as I said earlier, is the enabling legislation that would call for this. Senate Resolution 84 would be the constitutional amendment that we would have to ask the voters if this is something that they would want the state to be able to enter into. And if I could go one step further, if you will remember back to last year, we had Senate Bill 220, which was the enabling legislation for the Board of Regents to do this. We had separated those two out, and we're going to try to put it in. We would need the separate enabling legislation, but we would be able to make the resolution into just one question for the Board of Regents and for the state properties. So that's simply what we're asking. The same benefits that would be received by the state properties would be received by the Board of Regents in being able to have the ability to enter into long-term leases. Having said all that, I would tell you that if the committee is comfortable with one and not the other, then certainly we would want to move forward with whichever one the committee might in their wisdom, find appropriate at this time.
Members of the committee? Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to get my hands around what all we're doing with Senate Bill 37. I mean, it's, you know, I know we're talking about multi-year leasing, and that we've had some discussion on this previously, especially dealing with the real estate brokers in a competitive selection process. Have we worked out any of the kinks that we've talked about? Senator, you and I have not had this conversation, but Frank and I have. And I mean, has there been any more discussion on how you're going to go through this selection process? If you're going to have a registration of brokers, are we going to have just a select few? Is it going to be a bid process? I mean, how exactly is that process going to go out?
Ms. Smith, if you could come to the microphone, please.
And I'm sorry, Senator, I just, you know.
By all means.
Nice jacket, too, though, Senator. Get it, Frank.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative. The question is a good one. We would, through a competitive process, select the appropriate broker based on qualifications, their experience with doing transactions in that area, their experience with doing transactions of this sort, office buildings, and select on a competitive basis the appropriate private sector help for the specific deal. Each one would be unique.
And will they be geographically located? So you might have one or two in the Atlanta area, one or two in the Savannah area, one in Columbus.
We may. It'll depend on how many multi-year lease deals there actually are going to be in the area. We're not going to set up regions or anything like that. What we're going to do is say which deals make sense to do a multi-year agreement based on size, based on comfort that no deal will go away. And then if there's going to be a deal in that area, then we're going to advertise for transaction assistance if we need it. Not in every case where we're going to need a broker. In some small instances, we think we can do a pretty good job on our own.
So we're not going to handle it like we're doing with contractors for DOAS.
I'm not sure how contractors.
Well, that's what I was getting
DOAS.
at, Representative Jurgensen. And that,
Right.
you know, basically, I didn't know how we were going to go through it.
Sure.
So we're going to do it on a project-by-project basis, depending on the location of the project.
As necessary, where the Properties Commission believes transaction services assistance would benefit the state, we will go through a competitive selection process to hire that service.
All right. Also, will you look at line 32 and talk to me about the leaseback program? You know, it seems I recall something going on with some leaseback programs on transportation. I'm not sure what we're doing here. Where we're going to buy with state dollars and we're going to sell it to a private entity and then lease it back.
Well, the concept would be that we would be able to sell a state-owned asset, generate an influx of cash, and then turn around and lease that asset back from that new landlord. The benefit there would be the inflow of cash, if necessary. The potential negative would be now you're paying for a rental rate where you actually own the building before. So there are pros and cons to that type of transaction, and I would tell you that that would be a very, very rare instance that would be used.
All right. And I'm just trying to play out scenarios on how this would happen. Mm-hmm. Would they be paying property taxes, or would they have some kind of tax abatement on the property since it's not they don't own it?
They would have to pay property taxes. I mean, if the landlord, XYZ landlord, acquires a piece of property from the state, they now are required to pay property taxes, even if the state is leasing it back from them.
So it would be the land and the facility, not just the facility,
Yes, sir.
that we'd be leasing back. And I'm just trying to see how, I'm trying to protect the taxpayers' dollars here, and that's what
Sure.
I'm trying to say is if we use taxpayer dollars and we buy a piece of property, we upgrade it with maybe bonds from the state to do a facility, then we sell it, that we pay off these bonds, then we lease it back from someone where they were able to depreciate it off of their taxes, and then we pay a premium over a term of 20 years. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I guess
Up to 20 years.
Up to 20 years, correct. But I would tell you we would certainly not do anything. You mentioned bonds in there, GO bonds. Georgia State Finance Investment Commission Finance Division, throughout this legislation, has oversight on how much multi-year leasing the Properties Commission can do. It's in Section 5. And so there would be caps on how much, because this would be considered capital debt, how much capital debt could be entered into every single year. And that'd be based on the governor's revenue projection. And so there are checks and balances in here with that.
Is there other questions? 'Cause I've got some more, but why don't you go to some other folks?
Representative Jurgensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess to go down the same road that we were talking about before, I think the question would be on that, and I know you said this would be rare, but it's something to think about. I hadn't thought about this till you said that. If that were the case, then the rental rate would have to include the property taxes that the state's paying. So the state taxpayer subsidizing the county or the city property tax rolls.
Well,
You know?
yes.
That might be a consideration. I don't know if there would be a way to
And
abate that or not, but
I mean, I would argue that every lease that we have where we lease from a private entity,
true.
that rental rate, I mean, we have 2,000 leases all over the state.
Yeah,
I
but
would
right now
bet
we
you
own
all
the
2,000.
property. Right now we would own the property.
Right now we would own the property, right,
yeah.
exactly. So it's a matter of generating an influx of cash on the front end, and if you can do something better with that.
Yeah,
if
and I
you
understand
can.
that. My main comment was that looking at the history of this bill, we passed this bill out of committee last year, and did not make it out of day 40, and I'm assuming it's the same bill 37
Yes.
that we passed out as it is. So, to your comment, Senator, my recollection of the bill, we had some significant discussion and debate about this around the concept of those brokerage fees, and I talked with Mr. Stansel, and I think we got comfortable with that, when we passed this bill out. The second half of the bill, or the second bill associated with this, was where the issues were, and I have not had any further dialogue on that particular bill. So just to clarify that, that we did not pass the second bill associated with this out of committee, and we have had no dialogue further with that.
If it would be helpful, and don't let me overstep my bounds, but would it be helpful if I just reminded the committee of the three major changes that were from last year to this committee?
Yeah, I think that would.
Okay. And I can probably reference lines here. Starting on line 15, that new language. Originally, there was, if there were fees collected or shared with a broker, the Properties Commission's desire was to become self-sufficient and retain those fees. The committee has removed that language, and now any fees generated would go directly to the state treasury. The next edit would be on lines 65 through 70. This was reporting requirements that the committee added to, adding both House and Senate Appropriations Committee chairs and state institutions and property committee chairs to the reporting, who would receive reporting every year, and then also further define what would be in the reporting, stating that the sum of all leasing obligations would be in the report, itemized revenue collections, and then a budget allocation for the next fiscal year. So all those were new. And then the final and probably the largest is essentially Section 5. Georgia State Finance Investment Commission asked for this language to be added to allow for their oversight in limiting how much capital debt. So every year the Properties Commission would have to go before the Georgia State Finance Investment Commission Board and allow them to set a maximum debt limit for that year. So again, checks and balances and further protection for the state's great AAA bond rating. So, Mr. Chairman, those are the three major edits to the legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any further questions from the members? Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, on the multi-year leasing, just so I can get my hands around this, the Georgia Building Authority currently has the ability to do multi-year leasing, correct?
Correct.
And we're adding this feature in this bill for what purpose?
Tackle that one. I'll start while our attorney is coming up here. But Georgia Building Authority's ability to enter into agreements is only on Capitol Hill. So their statutory authority, their arm's reach, is essentially the metro area. And so when we are looking at State Properties Commission as a statewide entity with core responsibilities of statewide leasing, GBA's core responsibility is maintenance. And so the Properties Commission would be we believe, the appropriate entity to do leasing services on behalf of state agencies because of the limitation of GBA's range and essentially
You said
in
that's
its mission.
statutorial? It's in statute, it's not in the Constitution.
No, GBA is not a constitutional entity. But the State Properties Commission, while not being a constitutional entity, if you read the Georgia Building Authority statute, its purview is specifically to the Capitol Hill area. And we have had interpretations from the law department that go along those lines as well. We have no statewide powers under the Georgia Building Authority, but the State Properties Commission does. And it is the specific entity that is responsible for space management. And if you read that space management code, it is responsible for the provision of administrative space for all state entities.
Well, I guess it comes back to where I was at. Why are we doing it this way? Why wouldn't we just change the statute to let GBA be statewide and then take away that boundaries? And my understanding is, I think we've had this discussion in previous committee meetings, is that it's not just Capitol Hill because we've had leases off campus.
We have had some that stretch out into what I would say the metro Atlanta area, but we do that with extreme caution, and we do not go outside of that area. But with particular regard to your question as to whether or not you can add to GBA's powers to make it its ability to lease property statewide, we would say please do not do that. Specifically, primarily because we like being in the Capitol Hill area, but also because there is case law out there that says if you broaden the enabling statute of the Georgia Building Authority to become an entity with statewide powers, you could jeopardize its ability to receive GO bond funds because you have essentially changed the original nature of that authority. A little, I guess, case law history, which I know can sort of bore y'all to death, so apologize. But anyway, case law has stated that if you take an authority that was in existence prior to November 1960 and you add to its enabling powers, you have created a different animal. And the ability to receive GO bond funding is then obliterated. So Georgia Building Authority is one of those pre-1960 authorities, and we operate many projects on Capitol Hill that require general obligation bond funds, and we would ask that you do not jeopardize that ability.
Well, could we not, in the same statute, expand if we expanded the area from Capitol Hill, we could expand the bonding capacity of that? That's statutory case law or not. I mean, if we change the law, there will be a whole new, as lawsuits happen, there'll be a whole new level of case law because we've changed the law.
Well, I would just say that approach that with extreme caution because the case law was very clear to us that if you do anything to GBA statute to create its or to modify its abilities or to expand its current abilities, that will potentially
And this is where I'm
create
getting
a
at.
problem with our ability to receive bond funds.
We're debating enabling legislation, but what's next is not statutorial; it's constitutional.
Correct.
And that's what I'm saying. If we can handle this without going into the Constitution of the state of Georgia, then we probably should at least explore that avenue rather than jumping through and doing a constitutional amendment and asking the voters to approve something. That's where I'm getting at.
And I understand that, and I do respect that, but I would just once again restate that please do not jeopardize GBA's ability to receive bond funds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Chokas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question that I have, and you spoke earlier about how y'all's area of influence is capital area. My question deals with the maintenance and the performance, the oversight of the leases for a multi-year lease. Do y'all have the personnel resources? Do y'all have the funding available to be able to actually negotiate, enforce, and follow up? Because, I mean, you just don't sign a lease and don't go back.
No, I mean, individually, GBA does not have that ability. I mean, we don't have the resources or the personnel currently to stretch out across the state to do that. But obviously, when negotiating a multi-year rental agreement, whether it's GBA or SPC, I mean, a lot of those responsibilities are taken upon the landlord, and we rely on the agencies that are in that space to notify us as to what problems exist.
So in other words, the agencies that are actually using the space would be responsible for informing y'all, and so y'all would be acting in how would that work? I mean, can you tell me how that would actually work?
Well, generally, I mean, if there is a problem with maintenance, services, whatever structural issues there might be associated with the property, I mean, they would keep up with that and notify us if there's any problems. Generally, the landlord is responsible for those provision of services or structure. It really depends on what gets details in the lease, but I don't know if Frank wants to elaborate.
If you're talking about where does the professional staff lie to negotiate, and it's in the Properties Commission. Building Authority is an organization of maintenance, and Properties Commission is an organization set up specifically for real estate portfolio management, which is dead in the middle of what this is. So we have professionals that currently negotiate annual leases that have to, on an annual basis, follow up on nearly 2,000 leases. Given this ability, we could stagger the renewal dates instead of renewing all 2,000 every single year, which would relieve a administrative burden significantly from the agency.
Thank you.
Representative Jurgensen.
Mr. Chairman, at the proper time, I think we might have an amendment that might need to be done, and I want to ask this. Section 6, line 96, says Section 1 shall be effective July 1st, 2011. Would we need to amend that to 2012?
Yes, sir.
So, Mr. Chairman, at the proper time, I'd like to move that we amend line 96 to July 1st, 2012.
Okay, we'll hold off to the proper time on that. Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Smith, I have a question that I usually don't ask questions. I usually let my committee ask questions. And after I ask this question, you may understand why I just let them ask the questions. When we're looking at your cap on the lease, and you're going through the Finance Commission and the Governor's revenues to get, do you see the potential if we have another revenue drop like what we've experienced in the last few years, to where the multi-year lease agreements that we have could be sufficient enough that it could create any kind of issues with our finance commission? And do you see that ever being a potential problem?
I would say no, sir. I think our finance commission is very conservative and very protective of the state's AAA bond rating, being one of only 8 AAA bond rated states. I would also inform the committee that 6 out of 8 of the AAA bond rated states are allowed to do exactly what we're asking to do here. So based on other states' experience that have wise fiscal policy, this is a practice that they take. And knowing the Georgia State Finance Investment Commission's conservative nature, I would feel confident that we would still be in a fine position.
Representative Chokas.
I've got another question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As again, I was reading this information, and you want to go multi-year to 10 and 20-year agreements. Why did y'all pick that time frame? Is that just because it's custom in the industry, or you're more comfortable with that?
Well, I'll tell you, the longer horizon, the longer term you can go, the better rental rate you can get. But you have to weigh that, how far can you really see into the future versus the rate you get. 10 years was where the comfort level resided based on foreseeable future versus benefit to the rental rate. So 10 years was where that felt comfortable.
All right. And Mr. Chairman, we'll follow up too, if that's okay. And when y'all negotiate leases, do y'all require, or is that part of y'all's purview to require the maintenance and repairs and taxes and everything done, or is it by the landlord, or do y'all do triple net leases where that is the lessee's responsibility?
I would tell you in most cases we do some sort of modified gross lease.
Mm-hmm.
Where those responsibilities, some responsibilities are the landlords and some are the tenants. But in the majority of cases, we try to put as much responsibility on that landlord. So the only thing we are doing is looking at the letter of the lease or the rental agreement and saying, you must abide by this. Because the more responsibilities that are put on us, the harder it is to oversee and manage that. And
what about, pardon me, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and what about escalation clauses? When y'all negotiate, and you were telling me earlier that the 10-year window would allow you to negotiate a better rate of rent, are those usually flat rents, or do y'all have a percentage of escalation in the escalation clause? How do y'all look at that?
It's really all over the board. Each deal is unique. Our first offer coming to the table is a flat rent, no escalations. The next step would be some sort of tied either justification or CPI. The next step is 2%. The next, it's a negotiation back and forth. Where we start though is flat. That's the most beneficial to us. So if you ask me what's common, what do we normally rely? I would say there are quite a bit that are flat, and then we have quite a few that are justified. Justified meaning if the taxes go up, or if the landlord's operating expenses go up, that's a justified expense that we would pay a greater rental rate. Those are most common.
Those are the most common. Mm-hmm. All right, and currently, when y'all negotiate a 12-month lease, mm-hmm. You don't really have to worry about that. It's usually going to be a flat rate.
Well, we have options to renew,
uh-huh.
And so in some cases your option is an escalation of the CPI, or escalation of a justified, because there are expenses tied to moving. It costs about $1.50 a square foot to do a box move, not to mention
mm-hmm.
GTA charges and
mm-hmm.
Other things that are expensive to actually move. So we have to weigh all that
too. Phone lines and
exactly.
internet connections
exactly.
and so forth.
Yes, sir.
But if you're negotiating a lease
mm-hmm.
with an option to renew,
mm-hmm.
either on an annual basis or so forth, my question is, it seems to me that y'all are doing such a good job at negotiating these options the multi-lease that you're looking at, I mean, where would the difference be? I mean, you're committing the state to something in the multi-lease, but you're already getting a commitment from the landlord with the option, and tell me.
I would tell you that we believe we can do about 10% better in negotiating that rate. And I'd also tell you that in practice, the state, on average, we've looked at every one of our leases, we stay 10.7 years is the average that the state stays. So why not take advantage of the fact that we're staying 10.7 years and get better rates? I mean, that's our argument, that we stay anyway, so why not enter into an agreement where we're going to take advantage of it?
And another question that I have is, since you're negotiating options, what would be the difference between having options going out that far in the future?
Your initial and option rates are greater today than they could be under a multi-year agreement. That landlord has that consistent cash flow and confidence that you have a 4, 5, 6 year cash flow versus a 1 year cash flow. That landlord will say, you can move out after a year or after 12 months, and now I potentially have a vacant facility anywhere from 12 to 18 months. These days, potentially 24 months. So his risk of that is significant. So if he can say, I've got a 5-year deal, he is willing to give a better rate for that term.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Representative Davis.
I wasn't sure if I had exceeded my limit yet. Now, the resolution, the question, is going to affect both these bills, 37 and 220, right?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me what the difference between the two is? You know, obviously the Board of Regents deal is going back to the Georgia Building Authority rather than the State Properties Commission, if I'm reading this correct.
I'm sorry, that the regents would go back to the Georgia Building Authority?
On their multi-year leasing, they would go through the Georgia Building Authority.
They currently do not come through us. I'm not saying that they wouldn't ever, but they currently do not come through the Georgia Building Authority for any multi-year leasing. I would defer to regents to better answer that question for you. If they have 1 year agreements that renew annually, but currently they do not come through GBA.
All right, well, I'm just reading the bill, and on line 13 of Senate Bill 220, it says that space rented or leased by the Board of Regents from the Georgia Building Authority. And that's what you were stating on the other bill that you didn't want to do. And I'm a little...
Oh, okay. All right. I apologize. I mean, the Georgia Building Authority does lease space on Capitol Hill to the entities that have offices here on Capitol Hill. Because we are the owner and operator of the space here, we do have intergovernmental agreements with each of the state entities so that they can occupy the space.
Yeah, but what we're talking about is for not on campus. I mean,
Correct.
and as we stated before, GDOT's got off-campus Capitol Hill stuff. I think Corrections has got something. Pardons and Parole's got something out in Conyers that are doing multi-year leasing through the GBA. And this bill is going to allow them to do multi-year lease agreements through the Georgia Building Authority that are not on campus. Because why would the Board of Regents want to do on-campus multi-year leasing unless they're going to get an office over here? Tom, you getting an office over here?
They have an office here.
Well, I meant, are you going to expand? Are you going to, well then.
Our offices are located in 270 Trinity Washington Building. We rent that space from the building authority. We have 3 floors.
Okay, and I was not aware of that, but
I honestly
is
believe
this
the
so
language
you could do a multi-year lease through Georgia Building Authority, or is this so you can do new facilities and sell them and lease them back in a multi-year lease?
I apologize for feeling or for sounding caught off guard. I wasn't aware of the particular language in the bill, but I believe it's trying to capture, just to be inclusive of the space that they currently lease from the Georgia Building Authority through that intergovernmental agreement. I don't think it's asking the Georgia Building Authority to reach out to administrative space elsewhere in the state.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Davis, are you through?
Well, I could do more if you would like.
I mean, in specific reference to the language, I believe it's referring back to what SPC Space Management Code says, but I think it's more, like I said, an attempt to just be inclusive of the space that they currently lease from GBA as opposed to any new rental agreement outside of the Capitol Hill area.
Members?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, absolutely.
If I could just try to surmise where we're at. Senate Bill 37 deals with state properties, as Representative Jurgensen reminded us, and thank you for reminding me. This is a bill that did pass this committee last year, but did not get on the rules calendar in the House last year. Senate Bill 37 deals with state property. Senate Bill 220 deals with the Board of Regents. That is a bill that did not pass this committee last year, but did pass the Senate and did pass over to this committee, and I am asking for that also. Senate Resolution 84, depending on whether both of them pass or one of them pass, the language could be different. That's correct.
You have generated questions.
Oh, great.
Representative Kidd. Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not really a question. I don't recall it passing this committee last year. I mean, I'm not saying that it hadn't, but
Which one?
Any of them.
Yeah, they did.
37 and 84 did?
Yeah.
Just 30? Okay. Well, I mean, I believe you. I just don't recall it.
Yes, it did.
I've got really serious concerns about the leaseback program. Because, you know, the stuff that went on with MARTA and their leaseback program was found unconstitutional in what they were doing. And basically you're using taxpayer dollars to buy something, then you're selling it back to a private entity who uses it to depreciate to get tax savings. Then you're subsidizing their property taxes, at the same time paying a premium for the money for the facility that you've already paid for with taxpayer dollars. So I've got... You know, I don't know if I'm the only one on the committee. If I am, then I'll be quiet, Mr. Chairman. But I'd like for a day or so to talk with the chairman, and just kind of brainstorm on how we can address the leaseback program.
Representative Buckner.
I was going to ask a similar question. This has always made me very uncomfortable, and I know how it's worked in the past, and I know the same things are raised every time this comes up, that it would save money, that it would be easier not to have to negotiate that every year. But I have some real concerns about this, and in particular with the leaseback program, as you mentioned. So if I had to vote right now, it'd be a no.
Mr. Chair,
That blunt.
Yes,
if I may.
absolutely.
We would certainly be willing to accept an amendment that would take that part of it out if it pleases the committee. If we
If we struck the in the case of a sale or leaseback for a term not to exceed 20 years, what we have done at that point is just said that we can't go out more than 10 years. But by not addressing anywhere in the bill a leaseback, I would assume that it could still be done. It just couldn't be done for 20 years. It could only be done for 10. Would that be a fair assumption, Terry? Are we doing leasebacks? Representative Davis?
Is there a prohibition from you doing leasebacks, or do you have to have authorization to do it? The chicken and egg here.
Well, a leaseback wouldn't make sense for a one-year deal, and we're only able to sign a one-year deal currently.
Yeah, but if we just took out, in the case of a sale or leaseback for a term not to exceed 20 years, and the previous to that it says 10 years.
Correct.
The language starting on line 31 says for a term not to exceed 10 years.
Correct.
Are you saying that if we just struck out the leaseback section, you could still do it to a 10-year period?
We'd still be able to do any lease for a 10-year period.
And leaseback? Because there's nowhere in law that says that you cannot do a leaseback.
Correct.
Now, I'm just curious, and maybe Terry will look at this as well, is because I know that the MARTA situation with their leaseback program was deemed unconstitutional on the constitutionality of leaseback programs. If you'll look at that for me, but I don't know if striking just that little section in the case of a sale or a leaseback is going to help. So I don't know how you would amend it unless you struck all the changes in lines 31 through 33, which basically would gut the bill and say you can't do multi-year leasing except for 1 year. So that's why I wanted a day to kind of see if we could brainstorm on how to fix that.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, absolutely.
If Legislative Council could help us here, could you specifically say that you can't do sale leaseback?
Already prohibited by case law, then they wouldn't go there anyway. But we could certainly specify it if it would make the committee feel better.
I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to look at this a little bit longer. It's almost 4 o'clock. Let's, Steve, if you and Representative Jurgensen, Davis, Chokas, if you all would work with Terry and with the chairman, and let's see if we can address that, and get something.
No.
Let's look at that and see what we can do, and if we can come up with something, we may meet again. We're only in tomorrow. We'll if we come up with something, we'll have a meeting prior to Tuesday of next. We won't put it off till Tuesday.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Meeting's adjourned.